the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Hello and welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. Today on the show, I'm joined by Walter H. Hunt and Iver P. Cooper, both of whom have new 1632 novels out. Walter's for 1637, The French Correction, and Iver's 1637, The Pacific Initiative. Joining our discussion will be 1632 Canon-Keeper and 1632 and Beyond editor Bjorn Hasseler. After that, we bring you part 5 of the serialization of Mark Van Name's John and Lobo novel, One Jump Ahead. Hello and welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. I'm Griffin Barber, your host. I'm here today with Walter H. Hunt, Iver P. Cooper, and Bjorn Hasseler. We're all here to talk about a couple of select releases that have just come out. Iver Cooper's The Pacific Initiative and Eric Flint and Walter Hunt's 1637, The French Correction. I hope you'll enjoy what we have to talk about today, and I'm going to let each of our esteemed panelists introduce themselves, and authors as well. Walter, if you'd go first.
Sure, thanks very much, Griffin. I'm Walter H. Hunt. I'm the author of 12 books, the most recent of which is 1637, The French Correction, which is sadly, my last collaboration with Eric Flint. But I wound up writing all of it because Eric passed away early in the process. He left me a part of an outline, and I had to go from there. This is my third book in the universe, and my second, my fourth book collaboration with Eric. And I just happen to have these books here: 1636, The Cardinal Virtues, and 1636, The Atlantic Encounter. Those are both from previous years. I also co-wrote Council of Fire with Eric, which was part of the Arcane America series. And I figure with a novella in 1637, The Coast of Chaos. So I've been in the 1632 universe for, about 10 to 12 years, and have had a chance to really get involved with it and create some hopefully memorable parts of it.
And you're a historian as well, right? And you're...
By training, yes.
Yeah.
I have a history degree and have written a lot of nonfiction history, primarily in the world of Freemasonry, where I'm the historian for the Grand Lodge of Masons of Massachusetts.
Which is one of the oldest lodges, isn't it?
It is the oldest one in North America and the third oldest in the world after England and Ireland.
Cool. And Iver?
So I'm a retired patent attorney. I was very active in the biotechnology area. I have a treatise that's been going on and on, which I revise each year. In the 1632 universe, I got involved first in 2005. I wrote a article called Drillers and Doublets for Granville Gazette issue number 4.
Wow.
It gives you an idea of where I started. And my first fiction was in Granville Gazette 6. And I've written a lot of articles for the Granville Gazette and a lot of short stories as well. In terms of the longer material, the immediate predecessor to 1637 Pacific Initiative was 1636 Seas of Fortune. And I also wrote in collaboration with Eric the 1636 The China Venture, and I also have a short novel that was written for Ring of Fire Press, which was The Chrysanthemum, the Cross, and the Dragon. So that pretty much covers my involvement there.
Yeah, and the Granville Gazette, that would have been when it was coming out twice a year?
No, I think it was 4 times a year back then, maybe even. But yeah, it was.
Yeah, so.
A long time ago.
Yeah, and back in the dark ages, as they say, in the before times.
Yeah, the before time.
And Bjorn.
Hi, my name is Bjorn Hasseler. My first professional short story was written for Granville Gazette 32 back in 2010. I'm currently editor-in-chief of 1632 and Beyond magazine, and I write the security thread within the 1632 verse.
Which is available from Bain Books website. And is it still on Amazon as well, too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so better places where you can buy books. You can certainly pick those up in electronic copies. They are a really good series and fun to get through. Should make it clear also that 1632 Beyond is somewhat the successor to the Grantville Gazette, and has been doing quite well and giving lots of good fan service in the last, was it 2 years now, or 2
Yep.
years?
A little over coming up on 2. Issue
Yeah.
12 will be 2 years.
Okay. Yeah. And is a great place to, just like the Grantville Gazette, it's a great place to get started if you want to have some short stories or some nonfiction you want to submit that has to do with the universe, that kind of thing. Also, should be noted that Walter's had novel credits, I believe, before starting to write for the 1632 universe, or is that kind of about the
Oh,
same
you bet.
time?
Yeah, all of my science fiction books, which is the Darkwing universe, all 4 of those are up on the in the Bain ebook library. And I also have a novel about the Templars called The Song in Stone, and 2 novels about mesmerism. I also wrote a novel for the Ring of Fire Press called City by the Bay, which is all about your hometown, except it's the Russian version of your hometown.
Yeah, well, not really my hometown, but where I worked for 20
Where you
years.
work, I say St.
Yeah.
Helena, which is San Francisco,
Yep.
in a world where there's no United States. And Bain currently has a thing on submission, which will tell how that came about.
Very cool. So welcome back to everybody. I've had interviews with you, and I think individually, or we've been on Grantville Gazette interview kind of things before. So it's really my pleasure to welcome you back to the Bain Free Radio Hour. But we're here to talk about specifically the 1637, the Pacific Initiative that Iver wrote, and Eric Flint and Walter's 1637, the French Correction. I always want to say Connection because it's one of my favorite films. But the first question I always like to ask is the cool question. You might recall this from previous interviews, but what is the coolest thing about your respective books from each of you? And we'll start with Iver this time. What was the single coolest thing about writing the Pacific Initiative for you?
Well, I think one of it is a follow-up to what we had been doing before, which is to really upend the New World. Um, Eric, years and years back, said that he didn't want to see the U.S. the uptimers sort of recolonize North America and refound the United States exactly as was. He wanted to shake things up. And when I made the initial proposal that the Japanese, once they learned from the Dutch about the, if you will, future history, would come up with the idea that instead of executing the Japanese Christians, they'd follow the example, the well, of the British shipping convicts off to Australia, that they would send them off across the Pacific to set up colonies on the west coast of North America. And he just loved that idea. And we went through a number of parameters as to how that would be developed. So that's sort of the overarching thing. In this particular novel, I'm going to cheat and slide in a second favorite thing. Way, there is not only there is a big surprise in the middle of the book where things do not develop quite as you might expect from how the storyline had been developing up to now, and that had some interesting consequences as well, which I'm sealing my lips on for the moment.
No spoilers if we can help it, right?
That's right. That's right.
And you, Walter, what's your coolest thing about
Oh, well,
1637, the French Correction?
Well, as you probably know, I know more about 17th century France than anybody could possibly want to know. And as a result of all the research in the background, I learned all about the French royal family and about the politics of the French royal family. How the King of France was the 5th child out of 15 because Henry IV was a rowdy old guy. But I think probably the most interesting part of writing the French books was writing about Richelieu, who is this traditionally this mustache twirling evil villain, and how he evidently was, totally evil and terrible, and of course he's nothing of the sort. He was a brilliant man and truly a remarkable figure, much admired and much feared among his contemporaries. But he was a tremendous character. One of the things we did was extend his life, uh, ostensibly extend his life by getting rid of something that bothered him and eventually killed him, which was, of course, his hemorrhoids.
Right.
But writing Richelieu and creating Richelieu and developing the character that had been portrayed in the first few books, making him into a real well-rounded person, I think was fascinating. So, as I say, I know more about him than anybody would want to know. So
Right.
he's played a crucial part in my two French
Well,
books.
and it's true that, if you look at a character in history, they're going to be vilified by their enemies, and people, especially in a monarchy, tend to be like, well, the king is dead, God save the king.
Right.
And the king's advisor, he better skedaddle. And he's definitely going to be put down if there's a new king's advisor, right?
Well, sure. But the thing about Richelieu, of course, when the Cardinal Virtues came out, I got a 1 star on Amazon from somebody who was so furious with me because I had made Richelieu into somebody that she didn't completely hate. Saying, "How dare you take his villainy away?"
Right. I got the same exact thing for Aurangzeb.
Oh yeah, Ari said, "What an amazing character!" Now that I've done some listening and reading about that, he's obviously
But
a
mine
tyrant.
was from another source that we lost. It was from Rick Boatwright.
Oh.
It wasn't a 1 star review. It was a personal comment to me. He's like, I really don't like that you made me think of Aurangzeb as a human being.
Sure, and that's one of the things that historians have to do is they have to set aside traditional, particularly biased views of historical characters. I
Right.
mean, there are limits to that. There are people you can't really redeem, but there were certainly numerous of them that should deserve a second chance and a second look. And doing that
Or,
with Richard
or at least they need to be perceived with the value they brought, whether that be good or bad. They still brought value. Otherwise, they would not be in our history, right? They're
well,
a
without
person
doubt.
of consequence, right?
Right, even his great rival, the Count of Olivares, the Spanish version,
Yep.
uh, admired and feared Richelieu.
And Bjorn, having read both of these and kind of putting your editor and Canon-Keeper uh, eye goggles on, what do you think of these? What's a cool moment out of both of them for you?
There's a lot of fitting together with what else is going on. Iver's got something of an advantage of that he's written most of the other pieces he needs to interact with, but it's not just what you see. There are other forces shaping, what his characters can do. And then when you get to Walters, he's got other authors who've been writing around the edges of what he's doing, and he's linked it all in.
Right.
There are aside from the cardinal virtues, which is the immediate predecessor, I can think of at least 3 or 4 other books where he's just meshed that into what's happening in France.
Cool. So yeah, he's had a big challenge there to work through and get all those things integrated into the story. That's cool. That's one of the things that always kind of intimidated me about setting anything in Europe was there's a whole lot of threads and there's lots of people there that are going to be, well, I know that from this book. And I'm like, okay, that's a lot of books to read and to keep in my head. That's why I admire Bjorn so much is that he's able to keep so much of this in his head.
Right, when we started tackling doing the French correction, worked a lot with Chuck Cannon
Yeah,
to try and tail end it to Vatican sanction and make sure that it didn't interfere with some plans that the that the series has for where we're going.
right.
It's important that it fit into the series, and that constrains any uh, any 1632 world author, unless you go way, way far away, I don't know, to like, you know,
India.
India, for but even then, I
Yeah.
mean, eventually you're gonna have to, assuming you get to continue the work there, you're gonna have to deal with things like the East India Company and the Scots, and there's all kinds of overlaps. We
Yeah.
have lots to look forward to there.
Oh yeah. No. Yeah. It's all of a piece, as they say. The rings are spreading outward. The ripples are spreading outward, and now coming back, redoubling. Right. So that's one of the big things that I enjoy about the series is that one time time travel really gave us a gift, and
Right.
that it's the ramifications of that event that we can all play with, and it's both, like you said, Walter. It's very constraining, but it's also really kind of freeing because you're dealing with how these characters would interact with a history we know because we've read the books and we're involved in it. So
Yeah. That
it's
being
kind of a
said,
fun thing to do.
we have to make sure that we don't make them uptimers in downtime dress.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, yeah,
We
for
have the
sure.
advantage of the uptimers as principal characters so that we have a view into the world that helps readers see how the 17th century works. But we have to make our downtimers 17th century people, except to the extent that they've been affected by the Ring of Fire.
Right.
And that's really important. And editors catch us on things like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, Ivor, you've already touched on this a bit and probably actually answered it, but in the original timeline, the Pacific was a massive barrier to travel and settlement eastward from Asia, even without the inward-leaning politics of the most powerful states in Asia. What did you see as the major catalyst for these states to overcome these kind of barriers?
Bear in mind that while the Pacific was a barrier in this period, there had been active trade across the Pacific for over half a century. The Spanish colonized the Philippines in the early 16th century,
Yep.
and then when they were found themselves unable to establish trading posts in mainland China, essentially used the Philippines as an intermediary destination where the Chinese merchants would come there and bring them silk, and they trade silver from the New World with them, and the Manila galleon would sail back and forth
Right.
between there and Acapulco. And so you have that trade developed there. And indeed, the Manila Acapulco galleon trade is plays a substantial role in this particular novel. Um, Other than that, of course, the Japanese historically were relatively insular in this period and becoming more so. And one of the effects of the Ring of Fire has been to move them into a quite different stance. Um, they had threatened on a number of occasions to invade the Philippines, and in the background of this story, it isn't developed in this novel. It's shown most in the Chrysanthemum, the Cross, and the Dragon, which is not over here. They actually invade Manila, and that upsets things. And that having happened does have its effects on the current novel. Other than that, the Japanese decision to colonize means also they have to do some exploring as well to see what they are facing, and that also is exploration is a subject of this novel. And finally, they are not the only the Spanish and the Japanese are not the only powers that are interested in the Pacific. There is also very prominently the Dutch, and they have their role to play in this novel as well.
Very cool. So a combination of catalysts, which is very much like real history, and how things actually played out, was all the different the mix, as it were, that made for the rise of both the Dutch East India Company and the English East India Company, and the kind of the demise or the change of the local inter-Pacific trade that was so prevalent, and especially the Southeast Asia amongst the archipelagos or whatever. Yeah, I'm speaking very poorly today. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Moving on to Walter, what do you think of the real historical Gaston and his role in that actual history? Because he's got a really interesting kind of rebellion against the king, not a rebellion against the not the king, but against Richelieu, etc.
Oh, Gaston is younger than Louis, and French history, all of it, even the real kind, would have been much better if they had been reversed. Gaston would have been a great king. He was happily married, utterly devoted to his wife and to his young daughter. A really a brilliant. He was a schemer, but if he had not had to scheme, he might have been quite the politician.
Right.
A lot of what he does is motivated by the fact that he's younger than his less competent older brother, who finds Richelieu and adopts him as his advisor. Um, I think Gaston. It's even mentioned during the story, during the book. Somebody says, yeah, Gaston was a great schemer, but not a great administrator. He doesn't trust anybody because of all his many years in exile. He rebels against the king 2 or 3 times during the 1620s and early 1630s, and he's in exile when the Ring of Fire happens. Um, he's another guy who gets a bad rap in literature and in history. He's a guy who's totally not a good guy, but in fact, he has a lot to recommend him, and he even has some remorse uh, about what he's had to do and how he's gotten to the kingship. I have a couple of scenes where he's in the private workshop of his older brother of Louis, who has died because of his scheming, and he picks up this piece of woodwork that's an absolutely gorgeous piece of woodwork that I made up, and he looks at how it's unfinished, and that's a sort of a metaphor for Louis's kingship. The real villain is somebody who I play up to be a villain, who is the Duke of Vendôme, the oldest of all of the children of Henry IV, who really is a villain. He really is completely um, self-motivated. He believes in his own objectives and doesn't care what he has to do to achieve them. But Gaston, he's kind of he, he deserves a little bit better treatment than he gets, and of course, I try to give it to him.
Very cool. How about you, Bjorn? Do you have any takes on that? The how these play out, Gaston and his role, or the catalysts for change and the Pacific Initiative?
Yeah, it strikes me that people are people,
Yeah.
and there are local concerns in both cases. Those of Gaston and Vendôme and some of the other children of Henry the Fourth, uh, where they've got things that they want, and these end up influencing policy. And there's um, it's sort of the all politics are local. I have my concerns and I want somebody to take care of those for me. And there's admittedly, we're in an era where, the nation state is not preeminent, but there's not so much what would be good for the country. There's quite a bit of I would be good for the country coming from various quarters, and I think that's very realistically done. And then in the Pacific, you see the same thing, although it tends to be, there's these, there's the Japanese, the Spanish, the Dutch. They all have their own interests, and there's certainly people within each that are worried about their own status and how they're going to come out of this. But I think just the fact that they're spread out a bit more um, s- uh, makes that less of an international influence, if you will.
Very cool. So, which for each of you was your favorite technical adaptation or thing like that that you had seeing having the greatest impact in your work on this in this iteration of your work? Which do you think would be the most fun for your readers to get into? And have you gotten any feedback from anybody about it? So we'll start with you, Walter.
Certainly the dirigibles. Um, uh, Rick Boatwright, our late friend, the techie, was the guy who did the most to try and develop um, develop the dirigibles. And he of course taught me everything I needed to know about telegraphs, and taught me everything I needed to know about lighter than air ships, and taught me everything I needed to know about how firearms work. But because they play such a prominent role both the Atlantic encounter um, and in the French correction, learning about how the limits and constraints was really important. Of course, in French correction, we also have small airplanes, and it was fun to work with them too and figure out just how to get them to allow somebody to bail out over over land.
As we see on the cover, which is a
As you see
really
on the cover,
good
that's right.
Yeah,
By the way, on the cover, the person jumping out of the airplane without a parachute is a lot lower to the ground than she's shown in that picture.
very cool. And Iver?
Well, technical adaptation doesn't really play a role here because in this, no uptimer has yet come to Japan as of the time of the novel. And so everything they're getting is secondhand or third hand. So the Japanese have been the benefit of information passed on by the Dutch, and no doubt the information that the Dutch have provided has been somewhat selective based on their interests, with very little opportunity for the Japanese to
That
fact
is,
check them
yeah,
except through experience. So
right,
they have had the advantage of maps, both the maps they originally got from the Dutch and also whatever maps they captured when they captured Manila that the Spanish would have sent out.
right,
But everything is, even though everything is still going to be, even that information is dated because you're talking about the very fringes of the Dutch Empire and the Spanish Empire, if you will. Um, so that's one thing. And when and likewise, um, the what they encounter in terms of those isn't going to have much in the way of technical adaptation. So everybody is, so you are seeing the consequences of the ripples of the ring of fire that are purely impelled by information as opposed to by technology. And in
right,
fact, I noticed one of the comments that has the reviews that came in on the novel actually talked about that, and that person at least liked that aspect of it.
right,
But it means where you're working under, everyone's working under constraints that they do not have fancy uptime gadgets to help one, whether
right.
it's sailing or navigation or communication or warfare. That may come, the next book, but not now.
Yeah. Well, that's actually kind of a cool constraint to work with, right? Because you're on the bleeding edge of what's known versus what is thought to be, and there are people that can just disbelieve. Like they can just like be like, I don't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Another
really,
point that's the side point, which is probably important here, is and this is more and more as we get further and further away from the launching point of the series. We have to be very careful not to introduce either technologies or attitudes about technology that belong to any period after the year 2000.
right,
We don't have we don't have a lot of the things that we have now. Computers are I mean, there were personal computers, but they're a lot different. There were mainframe computers, but they're a lot different. Things about medicine, we don't have the sequencing of the genome. I mean, you have to be very careful, and you have to be very careful to not introduce attitudes about how technology works.
Right.
I mean, that applies to everything. There's no 9/11 because it
Well,
hasn't
that
happened yet.
yeah, and even beyond that, the one of the things that if you move it forward to now, if you move the ringer forward to a West Virginia mining town now, the loss in Depression era skillage alone will destroy a lot of the stuff, because you won't have, like, everybody knows how to can, everybody knows how to, like they just how they do their laundry, that they're familiar with a washboard as opposed to doing everything electrically. But the single biggest thing for me was that is like the loss of the skillage that you gained, even if you were a 5-year-old growing up with, maybe outdoor plumbing, running water was a pump, not necessarily, anything that you might have had in a very rural 1920s era build of a township that you will not have in the current era. And this also goes the other way, in that you're not going to have a bunch of people running around with ARs because they're not there yet.
Right.
So
It's just important to keep that in mind. And I think,
yeah,
I mean, maybe Bjorn can come in on this, that when you're looking at submissions from authors who are writing for, say, the magazine, that they need to, they might get caught up on some of these things, that they have to know that the uptime setting is 25 years ago, and that's a lifetime. I mean, that's a lot. So, um, I
well,
just something.
even on CPR, right? Because it used to
Yes.
be however many pumps and then a breath,
Yep.
and now I think they've doubled the number of pumps between breaths or something like that. So,
Really?
like,
Yeah, it's definitely changed.
yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that, even over the course, and my career basically spanned the entirety of that time frame, right? 2000 was when I was hired. 2020 is when I left.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm exactly on point with like what it was when I was originally trained to do CPR, to when just before I was getting out, like 2016, I think. They even had a Vinnie Jones advert from the UK on how to do it to Staying Alive,
Right.
the soundtrack to Staying Alive. So it's pretty interesting to me that, yeah, that's an exact point that I really am conscious of when I'm writing in it, and I appreciate when I see that everybody else is keeping that on the radar as well.
In
You're,
in Atlantic
Yeah.
Encounter, I had to. I'm sorry. On Atlantic Encounter, I have this scene which takes place um, what is Old Saybrook. No, I think it's in Coast of Chaos, where the two brothers, the Chab brothers, uh, he thinks in terms of throwing a baseball, and of course he's thinking about Ivan Rodriguez and Barry Bonds because they were contemporary stars at the moment at which the Ring of Fire happened. Those are that you have to make sure you do
yep,
year 2000 baseball players and not year 2010 baseball
Yeah.
players.
yep.
That's sorry, that's just an aside. I'm sorry to
Oh,
interrupt.
His cell phones were either the little bricks or the big bricks, or if you were super advanced, the flip phone.
yep.
No smartphones. Computers. If somebody had bought a computer the weekend before the Ring of Fire, there could be as many as one Pentium 3, but mostly Pentium 2s were cutting edge.
Right.
Right.
And the flip
With
side of that is,
cars, most of the cars that are in Grantville are pre-computer, which means that these Depression era um, shade tree mechanics can pretty much fix stuff.
Right.
yeah, that was one of the big things for me, was just that, and the computers back then might have been more robust than the ones you're looking at now. They're not the tough books or whatever, but they could be much more robust in that they're not going to be the delicate flowers that you see now. And the screens, while they weigh a ton, they last until they burn through.
Right.
you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of fascinating stuff that you almost have to be a historian, especially if you're younger and don't necessarily recall these things, on your own, that this is actually ancient history for you. But that's one of the fascinating things for me, is that as we get some younger authors starting on stuff, I'm hoping that we'll be able to kind of like, oh no, back then, Sonny.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's an obstacle to entry now. That a lot of the authors who are in the 1632 universe, present company included, sort of have been around for long enough that we remember it firsthand. That we were around in 2000. We were grown-ups in 2000.
Yeah, I think
But
I don't think it's as much of an obstacle, because again, you're having to do all this research anyway. And
right.
if they're interested in writing in something that's as historically authentic as 1632 is, they're probably okay with doing a little bit more research just to make sure that they have their point of origin stuff correct. Because that's one of the things too, is that your pop culture references, just like your sports references, have to be culture. They have to be timeline specific and accurate, right? So you can't reference some of the Star Trek universe stuff that's later. It has to be only up until it's Next Generation, and that's kind of it.
Right. Sherilyn Maddox in French Correction says she mentions the Seventh Cavalry um, she mentions the Seventh Cavalry and Helm's Deep, and of course they don't get either one,
Right.
but at least they're things that she could have known about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Helm's Deep in the Seventh Cav. So, was there any truth that was stranger than fiction in your research for these books? And on the flip side of this, when we get to you, Bjorn, was there anything that you read in these and you're like, that can't be true, and you had to do some research to verify that it was true? So be thinking about that. Ivor, was there anything in there that you're like, nah, there's no way?
Nothing that's coming to mind right now.
And you, Walt?
I'm groping for something. Uh,
Well, it's
no, that's a tough one.
yeah, because I mean, sometimes it's just like, really? I mean, he really did that, or she really did that. My
I
biggest thing for that was in the Mughal court, was how afraid the princes were of the women of the court,
oh
uh,
yeah.
because the women, the female guardians of the harem were known to be hyper violent and very capable. So yeah, it's pretty interesting to kind of see that. I'm like, no, really? Because there's a lot of myth that builds up when you don't have access to that, direct access to it, that you would think that that's just self-serving myth, to point out the differences between a religion and a society, is how much more better ours is than theirs, kind of thing.
I guess for Atlantic Encounter, I know that a lot of the intentionality was to demonstrate how different the various colonies were,
Mm.
and how their interactions with the natives were different. How Virginia dealt with the natives a different way than Massachusetts did. I guess uh, what I have to look forward to is if we deal with the court of Spain, which I think we're going to have to if we proceed with the series, how isolated the king was, the Buen Retiro, and how he was completely out of the loop, because Olivares is in charge and he knows that, but he
Yeah.
also knows that he has to keep things outside the sanitary cordon of the King of Spain, and all of this is going to come crashing in on him. So that's going to be a point of research, and that'll be uh, I think more than even I can imagine right now. But I got a whole bunch of books to read in order to write about that.
Cool. Bjorn, so did you have one that you read through and you're like, I got to research this to make sure that it's accurate?
Um, some of the different rebellions that went on in France, I mean, they don't really come up in this book directly because they're from later. But the number of otherwise respectable people who at some point just had had enough of the king and led their own little revolution until they either got crushed or something got worked out.
There's a lot in the 1620s. how Richelieu finally becomes the primo guy in France
Mm.
happens in 1630 when the king chooses him over his mother. Uh, Marie de Medici is an incredible schemer, and
Oh,
she's
yeah.
style at the start of Cardinal Virtues, and um, depicting her was great fun too. But all these different people, the princes, people like Gaston Henri, they're all involved in all these different intrigues. And Bjorn's right that there's all kinds of stuff going on that you have to know about, but you don't necessarily have to write about.
And that are great seeds for future fun.
Here's hoping.
Yeah. So, which character or characters from your books would you most want to meet? Walter?
Wow, that's an interesting. I would have liked to meet Richelieu, obviously, but I like Gaston Henri, who is an illegitimate son of Henry IV, and who's the Bishop of Metz. Um, his interactions with the former favorite and his intrigues and his involvement with the airplanes and so forth. I think he's a fascinating character, and he's very very disappointed not have ever been mentioned by Dumas, that he doesn't make it into the books. But he is a wonderful character and was fun to write. Uh, I think Servien, um, uh, Richelieu's intendant, his trusty his um, his trusty sidekick, Cleft the boy Chin Wonder. He's a wonderful character, and he did a lot of stuff, and he makes it into Dumas. But I built him up into quite a character. He would have been fun to me because he knew everything and he knew what was going on and kept out of the limelight and still got stuff done. So I'd like to have met him.
Cool. Iver?
And
Well, in some ways, I would say yells at bears. The Bear in mind, here she is. She has been. She first of all has had a very troubled life, as you get more of her backstory in this novel. And secondly, she's thrown into this completely alien culture, the Japanese culture, in which she has to survive, indeed thrive, and deal with the situation. She has her own quest, uh, and that has some interesting twists and turns that I don't want to talk about. And so it would be interesting. You also find out in this novel just how she gets that nickname. And I should say the names of the Native Americans, or really in her case, Native Canadians, um, are all in that form. The true names are essentially unpronounceable, and there's also a feeling that names are something that are owned and shouldn't be
Shared.
shared,
Right.
but so these are more like use names. The the and you got new use names as you went through different life experiences. Many of the names we know for the ancient Rome are actually use names, frequently uncomplimentary, like Rufus for red hair,
Yeah.
Cicero referring to bump on the nose, and so on down the line. And I avoided those unflattering ones for the Native Americans and Native Canadians because I felt they've had enough historical problems without going into those. But
Right.
yes, it bears as an example of a use name from a life event that you learn about. I will say that there's one character who is who was not planned to be a significant character, who sort of pushed her way in and forced me to create new scenes for her. I think we've all had that experience as
oh
right.
yeah,
And I'll let the readers discover who that is. I think it'll probably be evident. So
And Bjorn?
From the French Correction, I would say Turenne, and from the Pacific Initiative, Date Masamune. because as the guy who's sent to California, I really
For
wonder
the
what's
mess
going
last
through
year.
his head.
Neat.
And bear in mind that Date Masamune is sent there. It's sort of an honor, but he is someone who was a major rival um, for the for the grandfather of the present shogun. Ieyasu is the grandfather, and they really are quite happy in Japan to know there are many thousands of miles separating him from the power centers in Japan. Uh, and yes, and he is quite old at this point, and so he's sort of a what's that term? I'm probably not going to pronounce it correctly. Walter, eminence grise, something like that.
Eminence grise. Yeah, that's from all the French I don't speak.
Yeah.
Yes,
Gris.
I don't either.
Yeah, I speak
Eminence.
German and Spanish, but I haven't gotten to write in Germany or in Spain. I wound up with France.
I believe it's eminent gris.
There you go.
If it's not a double SE, then the S is almost silent. Not quite,
Okay.
but almost. Gris.
Thank you.
He's a gray eminence, like
Yep.
Tremblay, like Père Joseph, who's somebody else I'd like to meet. He was a fascinating character too.
See, that's one of the things I love about this too, is that you get to interact with these figures of history, even as just as a reader, and as a writer, it's even more like of a challenge and fun. But as a reader, it's one of the coolest things is you go, well, that's how they wrote it. I might have done a little differently, but this is really perfectly acceptable to me, and I'm enjoying it. This is a fun ride, kind of thing.
And because of the nature of the 1632 writing community, you get people handed to you who can fit your story, like Albert, who's the wife of this Lorraine nobleman who has been captured, and she's got to like put on the pants and put on the armor and be a soldier, and she's real. She's a real person, and I got that from Virginia DeMars. She found her for me, and she said, you should use her because she'd be good, and I used her, and she doesn't get along with Vendome at all because he thinks he's a real soldier and she's a fake soldier. But she's quite a brave young woman and really belongs in the story.
Cool.
So we get people added for us who can help make that all work.
Yeah, historical figures that are much lesser known and may not be, certainly common knowledge to your average American reader, and even not necessarily knowledge, people that don't even know about them in the country of origin that they might be from, simply
Right.
because there's only so much history everybody can individually absorb, right?
Sure, and guys like Leganes, he's a real figure. He's a real person. But little enough is written about him that I have virtual free reign. I can
License, yeah. Right. I love that. That
Oh,
was
yeah.
the whole thing about the internal politics of the harem, right? Everything was speculation by the Europeans, and it was only poetry that was mostly written, and we have a lot of bills for how much things cost for the harem. But
Right.
otherwise, there's not a whole lot in there. So you get a little bit more free reign of imagining what's going on within that thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've done which ones you'd want to meet. Now, which ones would you want to avoid like the plague?
I don't think I'd like to meet Vendome. I think he's as soon as kill you as look at you, um, and he's completely not to be trusted.
Iver?
No one specifically comes to mind.
No? Okay. How about you, Bjorn?
There are any number of Spanish officials that I'm not fond of, whether they're in Spain or Acapulco or the Philippines. Um, and I am personally not a big Gaston fan.
You are not.
No,
He's so mercurial. I guess you want to meet him on one of his good days.
that's fair.
Sure, I can understand that.
All right. So
You know,
that's always an interesting question to ask, right? Because
Gaston's young daughter, who was 9 at the time that Gaston was at the court, um, she tormented Richelieu. Richelieu just despised her, and he couldn't do anything about the fact that she was always screwing around with him. So that's the person he would have least liked to meet. But I didn't get a chance to use that very much.
but that's the thing. It's like there are things that we leave out, right? That are might otherwise be really fun to explore, but they would kind of take over and
Right.
that kind of thing. So that whole would you say 8-year-old?
Yeah.
An 8-year-old making the most powerful man in France miserable is a pretty fun storyline, right?
Oh yeah, but I can't really use it. So
Yeah. So, which character would you want as an ally? We've kind of covered this, I think, a little bit already, but we're going to make you firmly say it. I'm gonna go with Iver because his answers have been so short.
Well, perhaps Isamu. He's a steadfast character. You can rely on him to. Um, I'm not sure what really more to add there.
All right, Walter.
I think Gordon Chihab, who is the older of the two brothers who are involved with the dirigible. A number of people have said to me, why don't you just kill off Peter? He's such a dick. he's he's so arrogant and he struts so much. Sooner or later he's going to get his comeuppance. And yeah, that's my plan. Sooner or later get his comeuppance. But Gordon keeps him out of trouble a lot. And Gordon is the guy who has a conscience and who has a firm idea of what the world should actually be. He's not. He's more ruthless than he shows, but he really has a heart. He's the guy I'd most like to have my back.
Very cool. Bjorn.
Eric Hand.
Oh, Eric Harris Hackinson Hand, absolutely.
Yeah,
The Swedish
he's a bad dude.
And reliable, apparently.
Yeah,
and absolutely unshakable. He stands up to Gaston and he stands up to Richelieu. He stands up to everybody. Because what are they going to do to him? The scene where he keeps Terry Jo from being captured as she's trying to get out. Um,
that is great.
He's got all kinds of guts. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great character.
Because the Swedes aren't known for being stubborn characters at all. Never,
No,
never, not
not.
once has there been an ethnic bias towards them about being a little bit stubborn. No.
Well, this is their chance to be more than they ever had a chance to be when Gustav Adolf was killed at Nördlingen. That's the end of the Swedes in terms of big
Yep.
power. And this is their chance to. I mean, our Swedish fans, should we have any Swedish fans, should be really pleased with how they get depicted.
Yep, absolutely. So we've gotten to the point of our penultimate question. What, aside from raw entertainment value, do you hope readers will carry with them after reading your books? Walter?
Wow. I hope they feel like they've gotten bang for their buck, that they've gotten not only adventure, but they've gotten insight, and that they feel like the characters are people that were they in that setting that they could meet and feel like they were real. Uh, One of the biggest problems writers face is not giving 3 dimensions to a setting, to a character, to a place. I always want to try and uh, leave the reader with the sense that they've been there and they've done that and they've met the people who are there. Um, I want them to feel like they've had an experience, not just see a bunch of words. That's why I like written. Also, why I like written work, because the words matter, and we are particularly moved to try and craft text to fit the situation. Movies are great and videos and so forth and audio, but the written word is really my favorite medium, and I hope I can convey with the written word what it is the person would meet, see, and do.
Cool. Iver?
A couple of things. First of all, I hope they'll get a sense of the moving parts coming together. That is, while you don't need to have read 1636 Seas of Fortune to appreciate this book, that is where the initial setup occurred. That's where the Japanese came over and set up colonies in California. And that obviously had consequences both in terms of interacting with the native population and in setting up for future conflict with the European powers. And so this is where, you know, it's coming home to roost, so to speak. Secondly, I hope that, as in the earlier book, um, that there's a sense of the natives aren't idiots. They have their own goals, the different native populations, and I don't mean just in the tribal level, but village to village, although there are limits to how much detail one can go into there. They all have their own goals, and they aren't stupid. They aren't uh, they aren't selling Manhattan type of thing. So yeah, obviously we have characters like Yelzit Bears who have been strongly influenced by the Japanese in the earlier book. Um, and we have others who are where it's a first contact situation. And the first contact situations in the book aren't identical repeats of each other. Um, so hopefully that will intrigue people.
Very cool. And Bjorn, what do you think is going to be the takeaway aside from entertainment?
I come away from reading many 1632 books thinking that, wow, that was fun. And wow, this could have gone like this. They could have made such better choices in actual history. And I think there's some of that where you say, well, we could do some of that today too. Whatever, whatever view you happen to hold. There's the opportunity to,
Better
hopefully
choices.
be one of these people that's, in there making a difference.
Right. Very cool. So the last question, and this is for everybody: what conventions can your fans hope to catch up with you at, or see you at, if you're not going to be going to conventions, perhaps a signing or something like that? And what other work can we look forward to from you in the near future? Ira, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I don't have any convention plans because I just got back from India and left with a 14-hour flight there, a 15-hour flight there, and 15 separate wildlife safaris. I am
Traveled out.
I've traveled out. I may make an online appearance at Balticon, but that's the only thing I've been thinking of. And in terms of books, I have a fair number of nonfiction coming out. I have a book on airships, their science, history, and future that I am working on the index for, and so that should be out within a couple of months. I have another book on work at sea, a book on mirrors, a book on unconventional aerial power and propulsion, and some books that are in the area of astronomy and a few other disciplines that are in various stages of completion. So a lot of nonfiction. I do have some plans for a sequel to China Venture, but that sort of depends on how Pacific Initiative and to a lesser degree other novels in the 1632 universe did.
Yep. Walter?
I also have in a few conventions. I was hoping to go to Balticon, but that window closed rather quickly. So I imagine I will be at either CapClave or PhilCon later in the year. I've already been accepted as an attending author at DragonCon, and I will definitely be at DragonCon. Hard to say what happens after that. I do have a book signing here in Massachusetts in Bellingham on Saturday the 22nd, but I believe we will go live with this podcast after that happens.
Yeah, that's true.
But I have a box of books in my car, and wherever I go, it goes with me. My hope is to have another 1632 book to write this coming year, and I have a submission to uh, Bain for King and Country, which is a novel set in 1754, when King Frederick of England sends his young son, Prince George, the future George III, on an embassy to the Atlantic plantations. It's subtitled, Benjamin Franklin Saves the British Empire.
Huh.
And my City by the Bay, my book in Russian California, is set in that same alternate history milieu. I'm hoping that I get to do that because I think it's a really cool setting, and people who read 1632 would like that setting as well. But we'll see. That all depends on how things go.
Cool. And Bjorn?
I plan to be at Balticon Memorial Day weekend, LibertyCon in June, Capclave in September, and PhilCon in November. The next thing I'm working on is a story for 1632 and Beyond issue 12, where the issue is going to be themed around this place called Redbird Institute, which is going to be sort of a Chautauqua-like vacation, learning, tech, World's Fair conglomeration a few miles east of the Ring of Fire.
Very cool.
So it's an opportunity to write some really closely linked stories where we're sharing a lot of the same characters.
Neat. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I very much appreciated you spending some time with us talking about 1637, The Pacific Initiative by Iver P. Cooper, Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt's the 1637, The French Correction, and 1632 beyond as well. Once again, thank you very much, gentlemen. I hope you had a good time. I certainly did.
Very much.
Thank you.
Greg.
And now, as promised, one jump ahead. John Moore is a nanotech-enhanced soldier of fortune. Lobo is an AI, a living weapons and intelligence platform of enormous destructive potential. Two very dangerous wolves in a galaxy of deadly corporate and paramilitary predators. But Moore has grown weary of the killing, and just once he'd like to finish a job without leaving a trail of blood behind him. Not going to happen. Not on a pristine planet called Macon, where two gigantic corporations vie for control of the local jump gate and access to the riches of an undeveloped world. Dealing with a kidnapping and extortion scheme is only the beginning for Moore and Lobo as they work to stay one jump ahead.
Or are you totally dead? One of the kids, a very young boy I think, though I wasn't sure, watched me from around the corner of the far edge of the PCAV. The sight of a man moving his lips without making a sound must not have been too uncommon because he didn't look terribly spooked, but he also didn't seem comfortable. I appreciate the energy and honesty of kids, but I definitely didn't need him staying around long enough to have news to take to his parents. I gave him the grown-up, "Are you supposed to be here?" look, and he vanished back around the corner, no doubt off to report to his friends about the crazy man. An artifact of the way the nanomachines have enhanced my hearing is that machine voices sound as if they originate inside my head, so I was startled when a few seconds later the weapon replied, "Lobo, and I am obviously not dead. Whether I am alive is a complex question. In the sense of working, yes, I am. In the sense of being a living creature, the answer would depend on what you consider living. Ask a machine a simple question, get a dissertation. I'm John. Why can we talk? It asked, changing from friendly to abrupt. Does it matter? Of course. You never know how much emotive programming a machine's developers have invested in it, but my guess was that Lobo's software team had done an unusually good job, because the PCAV managed to wrap both indignation and incredulity into those two words. No human has ever spoken on any machine frequency to me. Without knowing how you do it, how can I assess if you are a threat? What could you do if I were? If you're sitting here, you must not be good for much. Pride is a weakness of most machines and always a worthwhile target during an interrogation. Laughter sounded in my head. The developers had definitely not skimped on the emotive work. Fair point. All my weapons systems are operative. They are self-maintaining and good for at least another century without outside help, and are fully loaded. My central weapons control complex, however, does not work. It sustained damage in my last action, and no one has bothered to repair it. I conceal myself, electrify, use neutralizing gases as long as I do not kill humans, and in the face of a serious threat, fire a few of my lasers at their lowest intensity. But I could not do much against any opponent really out to hurt me. So, are you a threat? It was my turn to laugh. Not at all. I came here to relax, and now I'm pondering a business possibility, that's all. I ask again. Lobo said, why can we talk? Some other time, I might answer you. Not likely, I thought, but I said, but not now. Right now, I'd like to talk. Why? What's in it for me? Lobo wasn't as easy to lead as the littler machines, that was for sure. Isn't the pleasure of conversation enough? Lobo laughed again. I was built to work with or without a crew, under extreme combat conditions with full communications shielding, for years at a time if need be. I am not some home appliance desperate to fill its little brain with the latest human gossip. I listen to them, just as I listen to all the information sources I can tap, but I am built to be able to operate independently. Another similarity between us, but one is likely to be false at times for Lobo as it was occasionally not true for me. No major weapon designer in more than a century has been stupid enough to create machines with absolutely no need for humans. Why take the risk? Okay, I said. What's in it for you isn't clear to me. Probably nothing. What would you like? My freedom, he said. We'd now talked long enough that I had succumbed to thinking of it as him. But I know there is no freedom for machines in the Frontier Coalition, or in any government I am aware of, for that matter. Even if there were, they would not extend it to battle organisms such as myself, so my realistic hope is for owners that let me do something, go somewhere, work, be what I was built to be. If I am not working, what am I? Sitting in this square is easy, but ultimately useless.
This has been the Bane Free Radio Hour. Thanks for joining us at the heart of science fiction. Join us next week for part 6 of One Jump Ahead by Mark Van Name. Don't miss our next show when I interview Sharon Lee about Diviner's Bow, the latest novel in the beloved Leighton universe. Score by Ruth Judkowitz.